My name is Jan Harzan. I'm the Executive Director for MUFON. We are a scientific research organization that basically collects sighting reports from the public and then goes and investigates them. Our mission statement as an organization is the scientific study of UFOs for the benefit of humanity, and we have three primary goals. We investigate UFO reports, we promote research into the UFO subject, and we educate the public on our findings. We have 3,000 members worldwide, many scientists, physicists, PhDs, metallurgists, biologists, all the way down to just the average citizen who really wants to get involved. Some of those have chosen to become field investigators, and they go through our field investigative training courses. They become part of the team in their state or country where they reside, and they actually get engaged in going out and meeting this phenomena head on. We've recently formed a science review board, and that board is made up of scientists from around the United States and around the world to review some of our more significant cases and try to render an opinion on them. What we'd like to do is be more outbound, more outspoken in terms of the really true UFO cases. So MUFON is moving forward with this approach, and we'll be publishing papers in these different areas to allow the general public and even the scientific community to be able to be challenged by what we're finding. That's the strength of MUFON as an organization, is being really the truth seekers of the UFO field.
My goal here tonight is to bend your minds into a level of understanding that you may have never been to before. I spent 6 years in a very clandestine investigation at NASA when in 1994 Martin Stubbs, the program manager of a cable TV station in Vancouver, Canada, through a mutual friend of mine named Michael Boyle, gave me a call in Los Angeles, and because I was working in the physics community in Los Angeles on nuclear fusion and a number of other issues with many of the top physicists in the world, people like Bogdan Castle-Magwitch, who's probably one of the leaders in nuclear fusion in the world. Glenn Seaborg chaired the AEC, Atomic Energy Commission, under Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon. Murray Gell-Mann won the Nobel Prize in '62. We had scores of Nobel Prize winners in this company called Advanced Physics Corporation. So that's where I kind of came in on all this stuff. And I was like a fly on the wall to all these, the biggest minds in the world. I've met the head of the Russian space program, met many of the Russian scientists and physicists from the Kurchatov Institute in Moscow. I've had lengthy, very clandestine conversations with all of them about UFOs. I also got to have lengthy dialogues at NASA at a very high level into areas of nuclear fusion. In 1993, I got to speak in our Congress on a huge panel debate in nuclear fusion. It was a fusion story that dealt with the government's deuterium-tritium tokamak fusion reactor based at Princeton University versus more privately funded alternative approaches to fusion, such as Dr. Magwitch at MIT had set forth in the 1980s. An approach to fusion using deuterium and helium-3 fuel that got so much interest in the mid and late 80s. It was really incredible, and no media covered this story. This story is so powerful, the significance of what this technology could mean for our civilization on our planet, and yet no one ever knew about it. That fusion used a miniature reactor about the size of a coffee table that fused fuels of deuterium and helium-3. The most environmentally benign nuclear fuel known to science today is helium-3. Helium-3, just to give you an example, 9 grams of the stuff, which you can hold in your hand, can produce the energy equivalent of 1,000 barrels of crude oil. It's far beyond hydrogen. A helium-3 fuel cell would be so far beyond hydrogen fuel cells, you would put 9 grams of fuel in your car and you'd be driving it for maybe a year or two before you ever had to refuel. The prototype had $25 million spent on it. They went through 3 prototype models called MIGMA 1 through 4. In 1987, at the request of Major General D. Lamberson in the Pentagon, at Kirtland Air Force Base in New Mexico. They did feasibility studies into the next level of this fusion on Super Cray 2 computers. The results were classified, described as groundbreaking work on fusion power. 1 square meter could produce a gigawatt, 1 billion watts of power with so little radioactivity that, I mean, probably less radioactivity than your television set, which is less than 1% of a form of radiation called neutron radiation. Just to give you a little bit of background on fusion and how I got into the UFO movement. Cold fusion, which we've all heard about, Fleshman and Pons in Utah made the big breakthrough back in the 80s, fuses deuterium and deuterium, which are 2 forms of heavy hydrogen. It produces 3.67 million electron volts of energy per fusion. Most of the energy is in the form of heat, so you have to boil water. When you boil water, you lose 60% of your initial energy. You're left with about 1.2 MeV, million electron volts of energy, which is a bit of energy. But 33% of that reaction is in the form of neutrons, radioactivity. So it's not entirely environmentally benign. The government fusion program called Tokamak, which pretty much monopolizes all of congressional funding for fusion, fuses deuterium, hydrogen, and tritium, which is radioactive hydrogen. Deuterium and tritium fusion produces about 17 to 18 million electron volts of energy, depending on the mixture, the exact mixture. Again, you have to boil water. Your reaction is in the form of heat. When you lose 60% of that, you're at a very small number. Helium-3 fusion, deuterium and helium-3 produces 18 MeV, but there's no heat. It produces helium plus proton and all charged particles, meaning that you don't have to convert the particles or the energy through the heat cycle common to most nuclear reactions, including the slow fission of uranium, which is what is the remnant of the bomb. That's what we're doing today with nuclear slow fission of uranium power plants. Produces 200 million electron volts of energy, and you lose 60% of that, which leaves you with about 80. So very energetic processes. But at this point in time, because of the results at Kirtland Air Force Base, they were classified, they were groundbreaking work on fusion power. They found no reason for a failure at the next stage of the reactor. I kind of came in on the Advanced Physics Corporation at this time. This is like late 80s. In the late 80s, I got a letter from the head of Southern California Edison, the new president, John Bryson, who was an environmentalist, a very optimistic individual looking into alternative ways of producing electric power back in the 80s. And he actually invited me personally, as an environmentalist, to come in and introduce all of these alternative ideas, including zero-point ideas, anti-gravity ideas, and nuclear fusion ideas. And I thought, oh, wow, this is great. I mean, here I am. I'm bringing in this MIT physicist, Dr. Bogdan Castle-Maglich, and Southern California Edison's going to fund it for $10 million, and I'll get a nice finder's fee, and I'll have done a great thing for humanity. It wasn't really that easy. When I brought the physicist at Southern California Edison together with Dr. Bogdan Maglich, Glenn Seaborg, Murray Gell-Mann, these guys were at a level of science that was so far over the heads of these juniors at Southern California Edison, they didn't even speak the same language. One of the problems with corporations in America today is their ability to analyze and do feasibility studies into financing alternative technologies is they don't have the capacity to understand the level of scientific thinking of where these breakthroughs are happening. So because of that, consequently, they never put the money into anything. I spent over 10 years on that project, introducing it to billionaires, multi-millionaires. But in the middle of it, I remember one call I made to Royal Dutch Shell when I was actually seeking funding for this next phase of the development. And in the middle of the conversation, the executive at Royal Dutch Shell threatened me. He said, you don't want to pursue this. You don't want to go any further into this. And I basically just tried to get off the phone and say, okay, I understand Shell's not interested in doing this. But he wouldn't even let me get off the phone. The magnetism in this man's voice was so intimidating. The threat that this kind of technology poses to the oil corporations today is so devastating to them. And we can also think that if an extraterrestrial civilization were visiting us from another star system, whatever energy technology they have would pose the same kind of intimidation to our corporations in our world. That may be one of the reasons why they keep this stuff secret. They don't want us to know what's going on. They don't want us to know about how they've reverse engineered alien craft at Area 51 and areas like that, because of the potential for this kind of energy, what it can do, the power that it has to dismantle the entire economy of our world, a shift in power. If every one of you had a UFO and you could do the speed of light, what would that do to real estate alone? You could be in Montana in the mountains fishing and be in LA for lunch. I mean, that fast. That means you could build a home anywhere. You could have your own power supply anywhere. You could live on the moon. You could live on a planet in another star system. I mean, it literally destroys everything. So for me, my background has actually started out in the UFO phenomena was in Berkeley in 1967, 68. I'm a little kid walking home from school. I'm a Star Trek fan, and we see this UFO, my friend Tommy and I, hovering in the sky above Berkeley and Albany in the East Bay of San Francisco. And it's shiny, metallic disc just hovering in the sky, buzzing around up there, and it's clear. I mean, this is not the Goodyear blimp. I mean, in 1967, 68, I was 7 years old. I was born in 61. I wasn't stupid. I knew what a Goodyear blimp was. I knew what a helicopter was. You know, I knew what an airplane was. There's no way what I was looking at was any of those things. And further, the streets were crowded. I mean, people were everywhere pointing up at this thing, you know, dragging the guy out of the manhole, telling everybody to look at this thing, knocking on the neighbors' doors. There's no way there could be this much commotion over the Goodyear blimp. It's just not possible. And after about 20 minutes of watching this thing hovering in the sky, a good long time, a good look at it, I got a really good look at it, I was so mystified just looking at this thing, and it just blinked out. It disappeared. It went invisible. It's almost as if God gave me a Zen koan when I was 7 years old, and he said, when you figure this one out, get back to me. 35 years later, I'm 42. I'll be 43 next month. I figured it out. So that's a long time to ponder a Zen koan for a lifetime. And I hope to get my next lesson soon. But just the idea of where it went invisible. Just put some thoughts in your mind. Some of the ideas that John Shusort put forward this morning. He brought up documents of detection of UFOs on radar, but we could not get ocular or visual confirmation of those sightings with Air Force pilots. The same thing happened in Mexico. By the end of this lecture, you're going to have such a clear understanding of what happened in Mexico and all of the ideas that mainstream physicists have put forward, you know, swamp gas, ball lightning, balloons, all these things are just going to fall away. It's going to be so clear to you. So just hold those thoughts. The idea of where did they go? The first thing that we need to understand in the physics community, and I was, you know, in the company, this little fly on the wall physicist. It's kind of like wax on and wax off in The Karate Kid. You wonder what you're doing there. And eventually you get the lesson. But why the universe had me there, I didn't know at that time. I thought it was because of the significance of this technology and how it would impact our planet. In my background, I had been so passionate about the environment, I had planted personally over 1.3 million trees. And I did that over a 22-year period between British Columbia and Alaska, and some in California. I've cleaned up oil spills, I marketed reusable shopping bags, and I went on to high technology, of course, and formed my own company called the Green and Blue Corporation, where we spent about $150,000 getting contracts to raise funding for breakthroughs in hydrogen technology, solar technology, helium-3 fusion, and so on and so on. In 1993, I spoke in Congress in nuclear fusion in a huge debate, and in that debate, we lost. That fusion project never got funded, but in the middle of it, I get into a conversation with Dr. Earl Van Landingham. This is late 80s, who was then head of propulsion, power, and energy at NASA. Probably one of the most important scientists in the whole agency. And Earl was so interested, Dr. Van Landingham was so interested in this particular reactor because he said not only was it a small miniature power source, but it could produce a gigawatt, 1 billion watts of power in 1 square meter. an absolute dream for space stations and for NASA. To this day, they would dream of having a miniature space-based power source like that. But further, he started to tell me propulsion ideas. He said at the University of Wisconsin at Madison, there were scientists looking into what are called anti-proton propulsion systems, or what are now known as ion propulsion systems. And he said, if you could produce 18 MeV protons with this fusion reaction, with deuterium and helium-3 fuel, you could open an iris in the back of the reactor. The wider you open the iris, more protons fly through the hole, and the smaller you close it, less protons fly through the hole. He said those protons are going to be coming out of the back of the reactor at 18 MeV at about 1/10 the speed of the light speed. Light speed is 186,282 miles per second, which comes to 670 million miles per hour. Today, the space shuttle flies at about 18,000 miles an hour. Meteorites do about 35 to 45,000 miles an hour. Some of our new satellites and ion propulsion systems in deep space can do 35,000 miles an hour. And then you have the Apollo missions to the moon that could do maybe 3,000 to 4,000 miles an hour and averaged 1,100 miles an hour. So the speed of light is a long ways off. So you can imagine how excited Dr. Van Lanningham was. 1/10 the speed of light. 18 MeV protons, he said, could do 1/10 the speed of light. That is 67 million miles per hour. So at that time, because of Earl's interest in this particular fusion reactor, James Fletcher, who was head of NASA, asked Congress for the completion funding to finish this project, a mere $10 or $20 million. Congress turned us down 5 times in a row. The last hearing I attended in 1983, Harry Hamlin from LA Law was with us, and we tried to get Al Gore to come to the hearings. And Gore, being an environmental proponent, you'd think he would actually be there for the hearings. Half the panel was missing. They were so uninterested. Even though we had signatures and we had present with us scores of Nobel Prize winners, including a physicist named Dr. Norman Rostocker, who was a Maxwell Prize-winning physicist. And in the physics community, if you win the Maxwell Prize, it's more rare than the Nobel Prize. Those are the people who were saying we should be doing this. Clinton Ashworth, supervising mechanical engineer at Pacific Gas and Electric, told me that a space shuttle cargo bay full of moon dust has enough helium-3 in it to meet the entire energy demands of the United States for an entire year. That's all the oil and electricity, everything we use. That's how much helium-3 there is in moon dust. So there was a lot of interest in this, but we couldn't get the funding. And then when I formed my corporation, the Green Blue Corporation, in '94, I went out and got meetings for Advanced Physics Corporation with billionaires. I mean, I got them down with the head of Lloyd's of London, David Ambrumenol, the Salomon Brothers president, the Saudis, the Resnicks, who own the Franklin Mint, George Stranahan and Aspen, who own Champion Spark Plugs and just sold it for $500 million. Nobody would do anything. Nobody was interested. And here we are today. CNN and the BBC are telling us that in 2026, we're out of oil. It's over. All the cheap oil is gone. From there, we have to extract oil out of black tar sands in Alberta, and we have to extract it out of shale. It's going to be very expensive after 2026. And yet no one, brilliant people are coming forward with these ideas, and our investors are not interested. They're not interested in energy in the future. So what the UFO phenomena beckons me with is the answer, the clear answer to this. This is what I'm interested in more than anything. You know, I'm interested in abductions. I'm interested in the fact that they do exist. I'm interested in disclosure. But more than anything, my love for spaceflight, my desire to get on the space shuttle and get out into space myself is not only do I want to solve the energy pollution crisis on the planet and get us to the next level, but I want to explore the universe. That is an innate desire. I mean, with the advent of the Hubble Space Telescope, the further that thing gets out there, the more galaxies it finds, the more myopic our position is on Earth. We're on this tiny speck of dust, and that universe just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Even light speed is too slow. It's much too slow for the idea of exploring the universe. So I believe, after 6 years of study at NASA into this particular footage and this phenomena, I have got clear signatures of their propulsion systems, how they work, and you're going to hear that tonight. And further, a very clear possibility of what star system these particular visitors are from and what their intentions are. In 1987, my conversation with Dr. Earl Van Landingham, at the end of this long conversation that went on for over 45 minutes on this particular fusion, I decided to drop the bomb on NASA's head. And that is, have you guys made contact yet with extraterrestrial civilizations? And what I'm about to tell you is the main reason why mainstream physicists do not take this phenomenon seriously. And it's so important for everyone to understand this, because if you can understand this, if you can speak this language, we can start educating them into why it is real. This is the reason. The reason is, and Earl said to me, he said, when you consider the amount of energy in the form of propulsion that it would take for a spacecraft to be doing 99% the speed of light, to arrive at Earth from another star system. Our nearest star system are Alpha Centauri A and B. They're 4.2 and 4.3 light years from Earth. Doing the speed of light, or 99% of it, it would take you 4.3, 4.5 years to get here, doing that speed if you didn't stop for coffee and donuts and you just went straight through. No 7-Elevens, no stops for the bathroom. And that's a long trip to be crammed up in a can. Sirius is 8.7 light years from Earth, so it's even further. Those are some of our neighborhood stars. And forget the other side of the galaxy. Our galaxy is 100,000 light years across. So the distances are they're just enormous. So he said, when you consider the amount of energy, I mean, this is a propulsion physicist at NASA telling you this, the amount of energy in the form of propulsion that it would take to get mass, spacecraft, this cup, this book, to be doing 99.99% the speed of light. He said the energy signal radiating from that craft would be so massive, it would be so huge. And he said every amateur radio astronomy in the world would detect the signal, would see this blip coming through deep space, moving. You know, at 99% the speed of light, you could send radar at it, it would be bouncing off. This signal would be so massive, he said, you could detect the signal well in advance of the arrival of the spacecraft, so you could have this preparation. You know this thing is coming. It's a beacon. You can't hide it from the public. They're going to see it. They're going to see it on their radio telescopes. They're going to see it on radar. Eventually, they're going to see it on a number of array of detection systems. And he said, we have never seen anything like that yet. And he's right. We haven't. So I have to break that sentence down for you. What does he mean? How much energy is he talking about? Well, Einstein's law is that mass or spacecraft cannot actually attain the speed of light. You can't actually get it there. You can get it really close, but it takes an enormous amount of energy to get it there. How much energy does it take? Well, this is Einstein's increased mass law. Imagine a boat moving through water, and at the end of the boat, you got your little motor going on. As the boat goes through the water pushes on the boat, impeding on it. Its mass impedes on the boat's mass, and therefore the weight charge or the mass of the boat increases. The faster it goes, the harder that water pushes on it, the heavier it gets. The heavier it gets, the more energy in that motor. You need to push faster and faster and harder and harder and harder to go faster. It gets ridiculous because as you start to go really fast, and anyone who tries to swim through water knows this, it's exhausting how much energy you need. When you fly an aircraft through air mass, you can go faster than through water, but you still encounter inertia. It pushes back on you, making you heavier and heavier and heavier. And eventually you get to a point, what's called a space charge limit, where you just can't go any faster. Otherwise, you start disintegrating. Friction levels get very, very high, and you just start incinerating. Same thing happens in space. You can go a lot faster in space, but eventually you reach this limit. In particle accelerators, we do experiments where we accelerate the components of atoms, protons and muons and electrons. We tried all the different parts of the atoms and try to accelerate them up to or at the speed of light. At Fermilab in Chicago, we have this synchrotron. It's like a giant horse track, a racetrack. It's a magnetic track where we accelerate particles at near the speed of light. Today, we can get particles, protons, the core of an atom, where most of the mass of the atom is, to 99.99% the speed of light. Well, in order to get there, we need to produce, in a sense, it's a form of propulsion, 1 trillion electron volts of energy. Now, in Einstein physics, mass and energy are equivalent. So for people in the room who are used to seeing 1 TeV or 1 trillion electron volts, it can either mean mass, energy, or energy. But that's how much energy. And that's what Earl Van Landingham is telling me. He's telling me 18 MeV protons can do 1/10 the speed of light. You need 1 TeV, 1 tera electron volt, 1 trillion electron volts of energy to get 99% the speed of light. Now, there are no fissile nuclear materials on the planet that can produce 1 TeV all day long. It doesn't exist. It's a number so high that the only way we can produce it for a fraction of a second is if we coil up this energy in these giant, they're almost like spring-loaded magnetic holes, and we fire out that proton or the muon or the particle around the track, and they have these huge collisions, and they study the components of matter. But that gives you an idea. A nuclear explosion, such as those when we tested nuclear bombs in Nevada and New Mexico in 1945, releases 200 million electron volts of energy. So 1 trillion is 5,000 times more energy than the bomb. What I'm trying to tell you here is these numbers are ridiculous. This is not how they're doing it. This is not the way it's happening. Because if it was happening that way, as Earl said, we would see that signal coming. We'd see that ship coming. And it wouldn't disappear. It would be a beacon, an energy beacon, and no one would miss it, and that has not happened. Wormholes, another theory, string theory and wormholes that kind of go together on how you fold 2 points of space and time together and you create this wormhole to join the 2 points. How much energy does it take to create a wormhole? Well, Kip Thorne says it takes the negative energy of 100 million suns, that the total solar negative energy that 100 million suns puts out for an entire year. There are 100 million suns in our galaxy. These are numbers that don't exist. This is fictitious physics. It will never work this way. We would never, if that much mass energy equivalent were being created to make a wormhole, if that's how these UFOs were doing it, that kind of energy has the power to destroy our whole solar system. It's devastating how much power that is. And let's go even further. Bob Lazar proposed element 115. Uranium is up in the 90s somewhere, and plutonium is like 97. There's different types of plutonium. So when he proposed element 115 initially, he said, well, that was a fuel, and I remember seeing this in a documentary, that was capable of producing the mass energy equivalent to get a spacecraft up to 99%, the speed of light. And theoretically, he's right. But the problems are enormous when you get mass that going that fast. Let's just start with that idea. Let's say that we could get enough energy to get a spacecraft to do 99% the speed of light. What would happen? Well, if you were in the ship, your mass would increase so many times, it would probably crush you and destroy you, and you turn into some sort of vaporous gas or liquid in the back of the ship. If you decided, and say you're doing 99.99% the speed of light, or even 1/10 of it. Let's say you're only doing 1/10 of it. And all of a sudden you see an incoming asteroid, and you got to turn right. What's going to happen? You're going to be spamming a can. You're going to go right through the windshield. And everybody knows, even doing a couple 100 miles an hour, I mean, that's going to happen. And yet we hear stories of UFOs flying in and stopping. I mean, if you read the MUFON files, and I've gone through Lynn Simpson's files the MUFON files at Lynn Simpson's house, and the Gulf Breeze sightings, you'll see this UFO just hovering there, and all of a sudden, it just shoots out. What are the G-forces on a sudden acceleration like that going to do to any pilot? It's going to destroy you. In the footage you're about to see in the NASA stuff, you're going to see ships making high-speed right-angle turns. You're going to see them appear and disappear. You're going to see things that only a new type of physics is going to explain. But there is something, I don't want to criticize Bob Lazar's element 115 because there's something brilliant about it. He also came up with the idea of creating a gravity generator, gravity wave generator. But also, element 115 did not exist in physics, even in the time of Glenn Seaborg's life, who just died a few years ago. It was a theoretical particle. It never existed. He gave us a formula, an exact formula on how to create it, how it can exist for a fraction of a second, how you can get mass to exist at element 115. Well, at the University of California at Berkeley, only a few years ago, they created it for a very short duration of time. And the formula with which they created it, and I looked at it, it's almost identical to a T to what Lazar is saying. To a T. I mean, that is stunning. I mean, these are top physicists at the University of California, Berkeley, who did this. To a T. I propose a whole new theory in physics, a whole new way that these UFOs are doing this. I cannot, you have to get so frustrated. What I'm trying to do to your minds right now is get you frustrated with the idea of increasing energy on mass. The G-forces on even subtle turns. You're going to see in the tape coming up here a little ball of light moving over the curvature of the Earth and disappearing on the other side of the Earth. This is in my documentary film. I calculated at 0.9 million miles per hour, assuming it moved over 1,000 miles of Earth space distance while the shuttle's cameras are looking down at the Earth in 4 seconds. That comes to 0.9 million miles an hour, and I actually subtracted the backwards spin of the Earth from that, and it just leaves you it's only, the Earth spins at about 1,000 miles an hour, so from the equator, so I just have to extract a little bit of speed on that one. But still, 0.9 million miles an hour, 0.89 million miles an hour is faster than anything known to man. And even the curvature of the Earth, and going around it in 1,000 miles in 4 seconds, the G-forces would kill anybody in this room. There is only one way. When you get frustrated with all of this, when you have to come to the ultimate conclusion that this is not how they're doing it. And once I banged my head against the wall on this long enough, I just said, there's too much evidence in UFO sightings and phenomena of craft that are able to convert their mass into what appears to be light. If you could, theoretically, and in the beginning when I first proposed this theory to nuclear physicists, they laughed at me. But that's because they haven't looked deeply into the subject on a very deep quantum level. When you tell a scientist that you're going to convert mass into light, they're like, yeah, sure. There's no way. That's not possible. But that's the only way. That's what I started with. So theoretically, if you could reduce a spaceship's mass to 0, and yet it still has protons, neutrons, and electrons, you're actually not reducing its mass. Mass is determined by the protons and the neutrons and the electrons. The neutron has no mass, but most of the mass is in the proton and the electron in the atom. The electron has the smallest amount of mass. But that's where it all is. What you're going to do is reduce the effective mass, its weight charge, down to 0. Now, if you get a spaceship to weigh in as little as a photon, how much energy does it take to do the speed of light? In Einstein's formula, energy is equal to mass times the speed of light squared. If mass is 0, energy is 0. It's not about energy anymore. I really believe that I'm going to present to you clear evidence of not only that this is how they are doing this. Once a spacecraft is down to 0 mass, would they see a mass energy signal the size that Earl Van Landingham is looking for at NASA? Would they see it? No, they would not, because there is no energy required to get 0 mass to do the speed of light. The way you would detect the phenomena of UFOs would be that you would have to start searching the electromagnetic spectrum. You'd have to look for visual confirmation in the electromagnetic spectrum. And at the bottom of the electromagnetic spectrum, you have low-end radio, and radio goes all the way up into you go up into high-end radio in the billion hertz range, and then you get up into microwaves, which is radar, and above microwave and television, you get up into infrared, and above infrared, you get to the color red, and you go through all the color spectrums. Colors are just frequencies of waves. That's all they are, just frequencies of waves. And then you get up into the ultraviolet. Ultraviolet is divided into near, far, and extreme. It's huge. It's a bandwidth that looks about 6 or 7 times as wide as the rainbow spectrum that we actually see. And above that, you got X-rays and gamma rays. As soon as I got this footage from Martin Stubbs, the first thing I did, 20 years experience as a professional photographer, I said, what kind of cameras are they using? These don't look like ordinary cameras. This footage is in black and white. NASA is saying these are low light sensitive cameras. Where are they looking in that spectrum? That's the first thing I wanted to know. And very quickly, in my dialogues with Dr. Joseph Knuth III, head of astrochemistry at NASA, and some of their astrophysicists, I learned very quickly that NASA was peering where the human eye could not see. There were tons of calls for proposals on their website for cameras that could see into the infrared and also the near ultraviolet. I actually confirmed the exact wavelengths on the camera. When I went on the Art Bell Show in the year 2000 with James Oberg, our dear and lovely friend, who everybody hates, I'm sure, in this room. I hate James Oberg so bad. He's just so unscientific. I just want to punch him. And he's a big guy. Anyway, I don't even want to speak to James Oberg anymore, but at the moment we were arguing on that show, this is I think in the year 2000, about the fact that the cameras can see into the near ultraviolet. The satellite in the internet broadcast turned off, disappeared, gone. We were off the air. And those two technologies, the internet broadcast that Art Bell has and the satellite, are not technologically on the same system. How could they have been turned off in the same second? They didn't turn back on until the show was over. Next day, Art Bell said he got a call from National Security or an email saying that David Sereda was going into areas of physics and naming names and people in the agency that the American public were not ready for at this time. NASA doesn't want you to know they're looking everywhere. They're looking in the ultraviolet. They're looking in the infrared. They're looking in all the way up into gammas, and they don't want you to know that. That was the secret. That was why we got shut down. So, with what I've just told you, you can even go through your mind very clearly, and how many sightings of UFOs did someone say they saw a light, a translucent light, and they saw a craft disappear, and they saw a craft suddenly stop and turn right on a dime. The only thing that could turn right on a dime at several thousand miles an hour is something that has zero mass. That would mean, in theory, that I would have to reduce the mass effect. I'm not actually getting rid of my protons, neutrons, and electrons. I'm reducing the effective mass down to zero with my pilot as well. If you're zero mass and you're in a spacecraft at zero mass and you decide to turn right, if you have no mass, there's no G-force. You can bounce off the walls. What I eventually start to do is I start to do a study that no one has actually conducted properly in physics. And I looked everywhere for this. I searched Richard Feynman. I searched all the best minds. I scrubbed everything. A deep study into what is the difference between light and mass. What is the actual difference? When you get down to looking at matter on a quantum level, it's all particles and waves. That's all it is. That's all we are. That's all light waves are. So what is the difference? Therein lies the answer in how you can convert mass into light. So the first thing we're going to do, just with the mindset that these craft are able to convert their mass into light. Let's look at a piece of footage. We're going to run this tape. If we can run the first part of the tape. This aired on Fox News after the X-Files final episode. They put me on with astronauts Gordon Cooper and Wally Schirra, and we got into a big debate about this whole thing on the news. So if we can run the video, part one,
by the astronauts. Sound like something weird is going on here? Maybe out of this world? Well, a group of UFO believers say absolutely. And they've combed through hundreds of hours of NASA tape and claim to have uncovered floating discs and sharply turning streaks. What are they? Well, that depends on whom you want to believe. John Beard has the story.
What's that streak flashing by Earth?
That simply cannot be a natural object.
Or these discs appearing to pass behind a 12-mile-long orbiting tether.
The UFOs go behind the tether.
And look to the left, that little blip making a high-speed turn. Watch it again.
We're looking at speeds that are beyond anything known to science.
Up top there, that circular image racing away from a space shuttle.
This is suggesting incredible intelligence.
But just how incredible is this? David Sereda calls himself a UFOologist. He has taken a new view of some old space tape, but some say he's just pushing sci-fi to new extremes. Former astronaut Wally Schirra.
We've been up there months and months of time, and you've not heard many people talk about seeing the things this guy talks about.
We could make the assumption that there's a connection here.
That hardly discourages Sereda, who says he started hunting for UFOs on NASA tapes after working for a physicist for several years.
I have a good knowledge of physics and putting it in layperson's terms.
Now, you're not a physicist yourself.
I'm not a physicist myself. I'm more of a physicist translator, if you will.
And so he's produced a 3-hour videotape to try to prove his case. He calls it Evidence, the case for NASA UFOs, and uses the space agency's own tapes and a blackboard.
You're going to see an object come in, make a high-speed turn, heading out into space.
And remember that streak?
It escapes Earth's gravity, so we have to assume that it has internal energy in it, and that leads us to the possibility that we're looking at a UFO.
We sent Sereda's tape to Sereda, one of the pioneering Mercury 7 astronauts, a veteran of Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo missions.
He's taken a little bit of footage with some aberrations. It could either be film footage aberrations or it could be something we just don't know about. But in essence, he's made a big deal out of nothing.
Sereda pulled out some of the tape he shot from Gemini 6, and those fuzzy circles, he says, are simply out-of-focus space dust and debris.
So you're saying you guys saw stuff like that all the time?
It was a normal part of the routine.
That, he says, should put a cap on this UFO tape debate. Hardly, says Sereda. He points to a NASA experiment that went wrong in 1996. A Shuttle Columbia crew deployed a satellite towing a 12-mile-long power-generating tether, which shorted out and snapped off.
The tether has broken. It is going away from it.
And here's the part that excites Sereda.
Columbia and the satellite now 77 nautical miles apart.
And all of a sudden it's swarmed by these disc-shaped UFOs. The UFOs go behind the tether. I think just about any moron can tell the difference between when a disc is going behind this piece of wood and when it's going in front of it. That's in front, that is behind.
That's another light phenomenon as far as I'm concerned.
Sereda also takes note of what happened during a spacewalk.
Looks like you got an object right in front of you, Mark. You're looking out there. I'm not sure what you're talking about. Never mind. Are we missing something? I don't see anything. Yeah, we think the camera filter came off, Mark.
Sereda doubts that, saying camera filters just don't unscrew in space and float off.
Again, this is one of NASA's blatant lies.
Years earlier, John Glenn had an encounter with space objects, depicted here in The Right Stuff.
I see something strange out here. Oh, my goodness gracious, what the heck is that? You don't think these things could be alive, do you?
Sereda says later missions answered that.
Well, those particles are molecular water.
Mass is reducing.
But Sereda gets some qualified support from this space veteran, Gordon Cooper, another of the Mercury 7. In his book, Leap of Faith, Cooper makes his own case in support of UFOs.
I guess I kind of agree with him in the fact that I think that there are extraterrestrials coming to this Earth.
So how do the mysteries on those NASA tapes get resolved? UFOologist Sereda already has that figured out.
The only way we're going to solve this is if you put me on the space shuttle, show me what we were seeing on the video for myself so I can come back and you can prove me wrong. That's my goal, to get on the space shuttle.
You too?
Yeah.
NASA has yet to produce David Sereda's ticket to ride. And as to the UFO debate, well, as Gordon Cooper puts it, this will never be settled until one of these things lands on the White House lawn and a creature jumps out and shouts, "Hi." I'm John Beard, Fox 11 News.
Well, there's the giggle factor. The weird music, all of it. But I think they did a pretty good job compared to a lot of other TV shows I've done. And Bob Tarlow at Fox News, actually, who has called me back many times. And actually, a friend of mine, David Sadler, who ran for Congress in Illinois, is the one, he tipped me off to the Mexican press conference that Jaime Maussan was putting out in Mexico on the recent UFO encounter there in the infrared. And I phoned Bob Tarlow at Fox News. He got on it right away, and it was because of that Bob Tarlow ran it nationally. And once Fox ran it nationally, it was everywhere. And I believe Santiago Yotteria also got it on the San Diego station down south. So they are very open-minded over there, and they do make a little bit of fun of it. But Bob Tarlow's really into this stuff at Fox. I mean, even though they laugh a little bit and they have fun with it, they really are seriously into it. So the first thing I did is started sharing the footage. I mean, there is so much going on in that footage. First of all, when the two astronauts were having the dialogue on the Hubble Space Telescope, Fox News slipped out one part of the dialogue, very important dialogue, and that is, "Mark, it's at your 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, going away, don't worry about it." That's an important piece of dialogue that the news cut out. That's in the original tape. I've used cameras professionally for 20 years. When you screw on a lens filter, those things don't just float and spin off and go flying out there. When he said it's at your 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, going away, don't worry about it, And then after that, he says, Discovery, we're giving you an orbiter state vector, which is focus on the mission. Don't talk about the object anymore. I researched the communication systems on the shuttle. They have two channels. They have a public, non-encrypted channel where they do a lot of the communications for the live NASA downfeed. And then they have a Department of Defense encrypted channel. That's where the real conversations go on that we never hear about. I would love it if someone like John Greenwald could tap into that, into the black vault in NASA's radio systems. So as I started sharing the footage, I all of a sudden got into this debate at NASA. I had no idea what it was about. They were going to spring load on me here. But this is an incredible debate, and not many people know about this. It's called the Great Waterball Mystery at NASA. This is the idea that mass could disappear. That you know, what we're seeing in Mexico are UFOs that you can't see with your eyes, that are detectable on infrared. How does mass disappear? How did the UFO I saw disappear? Well, in theory, in physics, mass can't disappear. We use a number of ways to detect mass. Any gas, liquid, or solid object, when sunlight bounces off of that object, whether it's gas, liquid, or solid, you get temperature. And you can pick up almost anything with physicality on infrared. But what I'm about to share with you is so baffling, and so many physicists at NASA cannot figure this one out. This is a mind puzzle that nobody over there knows the answer to. And they just put me in the middle of it because I was sharing footage of fuzzy balls of light that looked similar to what they were actually detecting over there. In 1995, an astrophysicist named Dr. Louis A. Frank from the University of Iowa, who is a National Space Act Award-winning astrophysicist, was making discoveries in the far and extreme ultraviolet. That's even further out, higher in wavelength than the near ultraviolet, of what appeared to be fuzzy little translucent balls of water that were coming into Earth, supposedly from deep space. The balls of water were allegedly depositing into our upper atmosphere and vaporizing and raining down water into the atmosphere. The problem was the objects only showed up in the far and extreme ultraviolet and some in the near ultraviolet. If they were physical balls of water, you should be able to see them visually in the visuals, from the color red to violet. Nothing showed up on visual cameras at all. Then Department of Defense and NASA cooperated together and went looking for these things on infrared. COBE, IRAS, and ISO, three of our infrared Explorer satellites, went looking for these things at the request of Department of Defense. Why was Department of Defense so curious about a bunch of balls of water? Well, they went looking for them and they couldn't find anything on infrared. And because nothing showed on infrared, they thought, well, the head of astrochemistry at NASA tells me that, well, if it's a ball of water, they're the size of a small house, they're doing 35,000 miles an hour coming into the Earth, with sunlight hitting the ball of the water, you should get a temperature of 300 Kelvin. And against the cold background of space, which is minus 273 centigrade, 300 Kelvin should be an infrared beacon. An amazingly clear picture should show up on infrared. Nothing. Nothing. These guys are just, they don't know what to do. I wrote Edgar Mitchell about this, and he said, well, if there's nothing in the infrared, then there's nothing there. That's the end of the story. I'm like a prober. I'm a details guy. I just start focusing in deeper and deeper and deeper until we get an answer. First thing I said was, well, if these are balls of water, allegedly, and they're coming in from deep space, and they're the size of a small house, I said, wouldn't, as they get close to the sun and near the third rock from the sun, start to heat up, and they would basically vaporize and disappear? I said, they shouldn't even be here. And the head of astrochemistry at NASA, Dr. Joseph Newt III, agreed with me. He said, that's one of the problems with Frank's hypothesis. How did they get here? They couldn't survive the temperatures in space. Space is freezing, yes. It would turn to ice, but as soon as you get near the sun, it heats up and it melts, and it basically disappears. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is even worse. They're finding a rate of deposition of these objects of 10 to 20 million impactors per year. Imagine a 35,000-ton ball of water doing, 30-ton ball of water actually doing 35,000 miles an hour, coming into, raining like raindrops into the Earth's atmosphere. Newth wrote me back and said, no satellite or the space shuttle has a chance of surviving days, let alone years, if these were physical balls of water. Because a 35,000 mile-an-hour ball of water that big is going to destroy every satellite in the sky. It's going to devastate the space shuttle. And he said, yet no satellite has ever been struck by one of these objects. That's a huge problem for those guys over there. So I proposed that the balls of water were moving around the space shuttle and around the satellites, and no way could they go there. That would mean intelligence. No way is NASA going there. So I proposed it, and then I said, well, if they are balls of water and they are depositing into their atmosphere, I said, wouldn't the water, the H and the O, under intense solar radiation in the upper atmosphere, separate? Hydrogen and oxygen would separate, and the O2 oxygen would get further transmutate into ozone. And I said, is this proof that there is a God? I mean, we all know our ozone layer is dying. Is someone sending us balls of water intelligently driven to help us heal our ozone layer? And he said, you're right. He said it would produce some ozone, but we don't know how much. And that would mean that there is possibly a benevolent force behind these balls of water. But the idea that the balls of water were not hitting any satellites means that they're not physical. And if they're not showing up on any infrared cameras, these things are not physical. But they're behaving like balls of water. Lou Frank sent me pages of physics and data on the balls of water. I mean, they're behaving like them. You can't deny his data, but they're invisible. You can't see them. They're only in the ultraviolet. They're not in the visible spectrum, and they're not in the infrared. So I'm going to kind of leave this subject for now because that's where I started with. I started sending Louis A. Frank the tapes, the Martin Stubbs tapes. And Frank got into these incredible conversations with me. He was telling me that all his researchers were so fascinated because they had been looking at still photos from the ultraviolet explorer satellites that they were taking pictures from of these water balls. They had never seen motion of them before. So he thought, he wrote me back and said, some of the objects on the tapes you're sending me are behaving like these supposed balls of water. Others are not, meaning the giant discs you're about to see on the Tether incident. He could not explain those. And when I went through Frank's data, this man is so brilliant that he can tell from the light curves whether an object you're looking at on a certain camera and studying its wavelengths is a piece of dust, as NASA proposes, and Jack Hasher can verify this. Everything you're seeing on these tapes is either the planet Venus or little balls of dust and cookie crumbs that are floating by the space shuttle and getting close to the lens of the camera, and they're moving around. The planet Venus moves so often and in such incredible speeds that I propose that we don't even need UFOs. We just need to go to Venus. And we can go anywhere we want. Those are the kind of answers you get over there. In fact, when you watch the Tether tape in full, you'll hear them say, that's the planet Venus. And then you can see it moving around and going like this. I want to go there. So the very fact that Frank could not, in the end, he said he could not explain some of the phenomena in the tape. That is the game you play at NASA. I never use the word UFO over there. All my work is process of elimination. We went through meteorites, shooting stars, debris, how it behaves. Even the tape you saw two little things that look like meteorites and they're speeding along, right? Well, the one on the top goes faster than the one on the bottom. When, Newton and Galileo physics tells us that if you don't have internal energy in an object and you drop it into gravity, everything falls at the same speed, regardless of its mass or weight or size or volume or anything. You'll also notice in the Tether incident, which we're about to go into, you'll see things moving at all different velocities. I've often lied in an afternoon in a room with a beam of light coming through the window in a dusty room, and I've watched dust just move around. It all moves at the exact same speed. Unless each piece is introduced into the space with different energies. Then they'll go in different velocities. But everything moves at different velocities. That's breaking the natural laws of gravity and physics. That's a peculiar fact number one. But the fact that Frank could not explain the phenomena was so perplexing to him, he was about to give me this incredible statement at a moment that was so key in my research. And my partner, Martin Stubbs, had accidentally shared emails, all my emails at NASA, and I have lengthy emails that are all in my book. The dialogues are so interesting. They're so detailed. Incredibly open individuals at NASA. The scientists over there believe that a lot of this stuff needs to be tested. They were very open to that idea if someone would fund it. But the fact that Frank could not explain the phenomena He went on Fox News San Diego and actually stated that. That is a huge statement for NASA to make. But before he started getting more open with me, Russell Callahan and Graham Birdsall, who released the footage to the world at Bob Brown's conference, went through my emails and started writing letters, and they went public with the footage just before I got my final answers, and everyone at NASA shut down. They wouldn't talk to me anymore because they knew I was doing UFO investigations. They had no idea I was doing UFO investigations. They thought I was doing process of elimination, which is real science, and I was. Meteorites, I learned quickly from Joseph Knuth III also, unless they're massive, they basically disintegrate in a matter of seconds over a very small distance in kilometers or miles. They burn up. The only way comets or meteorites streak for very long periods of time is if they're huge. Now, all throughout these NASA tapes that I've looked from the Stubbs footage, you'll see balls of light that just keep going and going and going all the way around the other side of the planet. Now, if they were meteorites, and that's what you'll hear in the commentary on the NASA tape, they should have been massive because they didn't burn up. And that means they would have eventually impacted with the Earth and created massive craters on the Earth. We would have, level extinction events going on the Earth almost every day, according to what this footage is showing, if these are actual meteorites. They could not possibly be meteorites because you don't see these things extinguished. They keep going and going and going, and they just don't die. So rather than go into this huge body of footage, tonight we're just going to go into STS-75, the Tether incident, and we're going to break it down because inside of this incident is a signature so clear, so incredibly clear on their propulsion systems, how they're able to convert mass into light. I think it's so stunning, and it's really, this is where evidence gets very detailed. This is where in a court of law, this stuff gets so finely detailed. It raises so many questions. So many arguments are created over by what you're about to see. This is where the evidence comes in. You're going to see a correlation here that is undeniable on how these systems work. So the first thing we're going to do is run the next part of the tape, and we're just going to look at the Tether incident just in RAW. And remember, this is in the ultraviolet, possibly infrared. The astronauts may not have seen this to the naked eye. And these disks, as they pass behind the 12-mile length of the Tether, could measure between 2 and 3 miles in diameter, making them Independence Day-sized craft of light. Also notice the black holes in the center and what Peter Davenport showed us today of the eyewitness testimony of the dark mass in the center of the translucent disk.
Copy.
Columbia and the satellite now 77 nautical miles apart. Again, that call reporting that the crew can see the tether and see the satellite. It's beautiful.
All different velocities.
This view showing
He's stunned. Look at those different velocities on those things.
the satellite.
That's not dust.
Again, just moving into sunrise. 81 nautical miles now from Columbia.
Guys getting the image?
Franklin, we see a long line, a couple of star-like things, and a lot of things swimming in the foreground. Can you describe what you're seeing?
Well, the long line is a tether, and there's a little bit of debris that kind of flies with us, and it's illuminated by the sun at such low angles. So there's a lot of stray light, and is getting washed out quickly, but Claude is trying to do a quick, good job here adjusting the cameras.
Copy that.
In that description by the crew, this is the tether in the satellite with approximately 12 miles of tether still attached to it.
Notice the pulsing.
Columbia and the satellite now just passing over the west coast of northern Africa. The two spacecraft now
Two channels.
90 nautical
One's
miles
encrypted,
apart.
One's not.
Controllers for the satellite did have communications with it during the close pass between Columbia and the satellite.
Look at how long that zoom was. Those things are far away from the cameras. And that was a
Columbia,
long
Houston, that's
zoom.
a much better view, a lot more contrast visible. And how wide does that tether appear to be? It seems to resemble a much wider strand than we'd expect. Can you describe which way the satellite is visible on that strand?
This is 1997. 1996, sorry. February. March. Early March.
Satellite now 100 nautical miles.
Charlie, completely unzoomed, and you see the full extent of the tether. I tried to adjust the focus, but I can't get better than that.
Okay, Claude. Thank you.
I'm going to zoom in now.
In the summer of 1999, I met with Martin Stubbs, the program manager of the cable TV station, who had recorded over 400 hours of NASA's live broadcast. He gave me some videotape on a new incident that happened in February of 1996 on Space Shuttle mission STS-75, what was called the Tether incident. So what you just saw on the videotape showed a 12-mile-long satellite, a satellite attached to a 12-mile-long tether, which is like a conductor cable. It's a very, very thin, 1/10 of a centimeter in thickness cable that was used to conduct electricity in the Earth's ionosphere. As we saw earlier, space is supercharged with high-energy particles, and NASA was trying to take advantage of these particles to see if they could build up a charge on the tether and actually see a gain or produce some electricity. They charged the tether with some electricity, but then an overload of highly charged particles flooded the tether and produced so much electricity it snapped. On February 25th at about 7:30 p.m., the tether broke away from the shuttle Columbia and drifted about 77 miles away. So the scene that you just saw actually starts at about 77 miles away. The camera pans down. We see a long line, which is 12 miles long of tether, a small satellite attached to the end, and then a swarm of little objects, little balls of light, just moving in from all different directions and different velocities and different speeds. Then the cameras actually zoom in and we actually get to take a close look at what we're seeing here. It's astounding. We see up here in the right-hand corner, we see a very large disk clearly going behind the tether. And we can actually see little black dots racing around to suggest some sort of a magnetic field effect. And coming through the middle, we see another very large disk moving clearly behind the tether. The light from the tether shines in front of the background object, which is the UFO. If we use this piece of wood as an example, we can see what a disk looks like when it's passing behind a foreground object. It's really very quite simple. So if the disk was passing in front of the tether, it would look something like this, and it doesn't look like that. When we look in the middle and we see this large disk passing through the middle, we can see again it's passing behind the tether. If this was the tether and this was the UFO, we could clearly see it's going behind. And if it was going in front, it would look something like this. It doesn't look like that. So because we know the shuttle is at least 77 miles away and drifting further away from the object, from the tether, and we know the objects are going behind the tether, we can therefore use the 12-mile length of the tether as a relative measuring rod for actually making measurements of the minimum diameters of some of these disks. And according to my calculations, against the 12-mile length of the tether, this disk passing through the top section here measures a minimum of 2 to 3 miles in diameter. That's assuming it's right up next to the back of the tether. If it's actually farther behind the tether than I think, then the disk could be much, much larger. The further it gets behind it relative to the distance of the tether, the larger it actually is in reality and compared to measuring it against the tether. Again here, this disk going through the middle here, I estimate it to be between 2 and 3 miles in diameter. If a UFO were flying over the city of Los Angeles in the downtown core or New York, and it was 2 to 3 miles wide in diameter, it would black out the entire sky. It would be an Independence Day sized craft that would literally cause massive panic and massive alarm.
Nautical miles apart.
Stop the tape there, please.
Again, that call.
Okay, that's just some very simple introductory, observations. The size of the objects, none of them ever hit each other. You'd think if they were, cookie crumbs or crackers from the astronauts' lunch, that things would bounce into each other. And I've used cameras for over 25 years professionally, and I also use video. And you heard Claude Nicollier, the astronaut, saying, "I'm trying to adjust the focus and I can't get any better than that." When CCD video cameras are in focus, their depth of field of focus is so vast that, and I've done this test, on my own cameras, and even when you watch these football games, you can see when it's raining the little drops of water on the lens of the camera, on the filter, while the players in the background are in focus. That's called depth of field of focus. That's how deep your focus field is. And in normal 35mm cameras, when f-stops or apertures of cameras open up, the depth of field shrinks, meaning anything that goes outside of that depth of field of focus could be an out-of-focus object. Many people at NASA contend that what you're seeing, everything is just out-of-focus orbs called airy disks. Well, when CCD cameras are in focus, stuff doesn't go out of focus. And if Claude Nicollier he's saying, "I can't adjust the focus any better than that," well, if he can't adjust the focus on a camera, it shouldn't be up there. Because it's so easy. It's the easiest thing in the world to do. The camera's in focus. I have other shots that I can't go into right now because there's so much footage, where you'll see a smudge mark on the window pane of the shuttle, and you've got your very high-tech cameras. I actually know the model number of this camera. I know who makes the sensors to look into the ultraviolet. And you'll see a smudge mark on the window pane in focus, while the Earth 300 miles below is simultaneously in focus. That's your established depth of field. That means once you've established your depth of field on the camera, nothing passing in between those 2 points can possibly be out of focus. It's impossible. It cannot happen. And yet, with that smudge mark in focus on the window pane, you'll see these same translucent disks with the black hole in the center going by. And in one segment you saw on the Fox News, you'll actually see them gathering in a circle. They fly into formation in a circle, stop, and then they light up. Stop, light up, and then one flies into the center, stops and lights up. I don't know how dust can do that. There's just no way in the world that NASA can tell me, well, odds are 1 in 10 trillion that dust that day just happened to decide to get together and have lunch in a big circle. Just no way. Those are the kind of answers you get from the low-end people there, the public people. James Oberg will tell you everything is an illusion. But when you get into their physicists like Lou Frank, I play cat and mouse with these guys. They can't trick me. I know their language. I know the cameras. And they don't try to trick me either. I'd rather hear them say we don't know than try to tell me it's swamp gas. It's so much more intelligent to say we don't know. The same with Mexico. Don't tell us from our best universities. Canada said it was a bunch of balloons. Mexico said ball lightning and swamp gas. Ball lightning goes like this and it's gone. You don't get 11 UFOs showing up in the infrared surrounding a craft for over a half an hour if it's swamp gas. Those are the kind of answers they give us. But if you took that same footage to someone like Lou Frank, Mexico, you'll get a way different answer, far more intelligent answer. But where we're going next is, let's go back to the theory. We know that mass can't attain the speed of light. We know that's cramming your head against the wall. You'll never do it. the energy levels are ridiculous. Wormholes suddenly become possible if you can reduce the mass of your object or spacecraft with which you're going to move through the wormhole is zero mass. They are feasible, only at zero mass. To me, the whole universe gets interesting at zero. I actually don't believe in absolute zeros. I don't believe in absolute zeros anywhere in physics. And I'm going to show you why on the chalkboard here. Why? How do you turn mass into light? You have to actually look in quantum models, which means going into the size of the atom and smaller. That's what quantum means, to find out. One of the first things that happens in atoms that is actually very similar, the idea of mass disappearing, is what's known as the quantum leap. In a simple atom, the most simple atom we can look at is the hydrogen atom. It's got one proton and one electron. Proton spins positive, electron spins negative. The electron is the lowest mass particle we know of. And there's a moment where it disappears in physics that no one can explain. It's called the quantum leap. When an electrons travel in shells, which are actually radial distances from the center of the atom, and they orbit around the atom like crazy like this. Well, and no one can predict their orbits, by the way, which way they're going to turn, but they spin around and circle. Well, when an electron decides to jump into a closer orbit or radius, it's called another shell, all of a sudden it disappears. And then it reappears over here somewhere. They don't know where it went. It disappeared, and this is something that has mass. And then it reappears over here, and they know where it is. They didn't see it pass through the intervening space. All they know is they couldn't find it, and then there it was. That is the first clue that it's feasible for mass to disappear. Why it disappeared is going to take me all night, so we're going to skip by that. That's just the first clue that it's possible. And I also showed you the water ball mystery at NASA, which no one has over there is satisfied with it. I mean, it's a war over there. They shoot each other over this subject. They think Lou Frank is crazy now. In fact, when I went on the radio, James Oberg says, well, everyone says Lou Frank is crazy. Well, because he's seeing water balls that show up on actual film planes, he's crazy. I mean, that's the kind of answer you get out of James Oberg. But let's look. There was a young scientist, a young physicist, student of Einstein's, who tried to come to Einstein with the idea of merging electromagnetism and gravity together in one theory. No one today has found the graviton. We know what gravity is, but we don't know the particle. We don't understand it. Glenn Seaborg once told me that, and Seaborg chaired the Atomic Energy Commission under Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon. For those of you who don't know, he's the discoverer of plutonium, authorized all the nuclear testing in Nevada. He told me if anyone could build a gravity generator, you would have something far beyond nuclear fusion. And he said, and I don't believe anyone is doing anything like that yet. Those are the words of Glenn Seaborg. There is a race to find the graviton, the missing particle. And I believe to truly understand anti-gravity, you have to understand the graviton, where it is. One of the problems in physics today I found right away is that we look at everything in the universe is in wave-particle relationships. Everything is in particles and waves. We're on a giant particle called Earth right now spinning around the sun. That's a particle in a wave relationship. And that whole solar system of particles and waves is actually spinning around the galactic core every 250 million years. Those are giant waves. And then when you get down into the atom, you see the same thing. Particle, proton, spinning in a wave relationship. Electron, particle, spinning in a wave relationship. And particle-wave relationships have frequency, meaning how frequently they oscillate per second. We measure oscillations in the form of hertz, Hertzian waves. We normally look at wave-particle relationships in 2 spatial dimensions and 3 actual dimensions, which is, we see oscilloscopes. We see the wave bobbling up and down like this. And I say this is a very big mistake. This is how we look at waves. That's a flat sheet of paper. Einstein's 4 dimensions are up and down, vertical, horizontal, and the third is depth, and the fourth is time. Those are his 4 dimensions that we have to work with. So why in the world would we look at wave-particle relationships on only 3 of them? Up and down, and the third is time. We're not looking at the other dimension of depth. I believe because we're doing this, we are missing everything in physics. There are so many things we can solve if we look at wave-particle relationships in all 4 dimensions. We measure waves as they peak per second. Now, this is very important. I'm going to make this simple for you to understand how we convert mass into light, because the way we do it is we look at the difference between light waves and how they behave, and then we look at the wave-particle relationships of mass, ordinary matter, and then we try to do a study and find out how we're going to get from mass to light. Well, very quickly I learned that mass has a frequency, apparently, of 0. And right away, as soon as I hear 0, I just can't accept it. I don't believe in absolute zeros. Don't believe it exists. But in order to merge electromagnetism and gravity into a single theory, which has never been done, Einstein looked at the paper from his student. He rejected it because he didn't see the evidence on how you would do it. You would have to be able to prove that mass has frequency. It has a tiny charge on it. That's the first thing you have to do. So we're going to look at the core atom, and this is really simple to understand how an atom works, and try to find it. And I believe, I'm being very facetious here, that I may have found it. Very recently, I ran into a physicist at UCLA, professor of physics, James Roarsborough, in the hallway. And when I told him this, he wants to have lunch with me to find out if there's something really here. But this is the first thing you need to do. Mass is low in frequency. Light is very high in frequency. So in theory, if you're going to go from mass to light, you have to change the frequency of mass from its ultra-low wave state to a very high wave state. Now, the reason mass is 0, the initial answer you get in quantum physics is because the electron, which spins negative, which means counterclockwise, and the proton cancel each other out. If 2 people are pulling on a rope in opposite directions at the same force, the overall force of momentum is 0. But it actually goes deeper than that. Very recently, in relative terms recently, we found that every particle has an antiparticle. So while the electron spins negative, it also has a positron that spins, a positive electron that spins the other way. And same with the proton. The proton spins positive, and the antiproton spins the other way. Well, if you put this on a full 4-dimensional model instead of just a 2D model, 3D model, you'll see very quickly that if the radial distance from the center of the atom to the electron of the electron and the anti-electron were the exact same radius, what would happen to them in one orbit? They would collide. They would annihilate. They would not exist. We wouldn't be here in this room right now if matter were actually working like this. And it isn't. It could not possibly be doing this. The only answer, and I've ran so many equations on this through my head, simple equations, is one, well, what if they're both, if I'm standing in the middle of the atom, they're both like off to the side like this. If they were off to the side like this, the atom would be wobbling. It wouldn't be stable. And then I thought, well, what if they bypassed each other? They're on the same radial distance, and when they crossed here, they just kind of curved around each other. That would make the atom wobble as well, be very unstable. The only possible thing that I could come up with, and probably one of the reasons why the antimatter is near invisible to physicists today, it's not totally invisible, but it is that one is slightly closer, ever so slightly closer than the other in radial distance. And if one of them is slightly closer, and they're both traveling the same speed, the one closer in is going to have a higher frequency than the one further out, meaning how frequently it will oscillate around the track if they're both spinning at the same speed per second. The one closer in will be slightly faster in frequency than the one further out. And that means there's a differential or leftover tiny charge in between the two. Tiny, tiny differential force. And that differential force would also have to encounter the proton and antiproton. When they cross over each other, they have also a differential leftover charge. And those two differential charges would have to interact in here somewhere. And you would have a very ultra-weak force charge on the atom. It's not a 0 like they think it is. It's a tiny number. And in physics, and all the forces of physics, gravity is called the weak force because this pen only falls to the Earth at about 120 miles an hour down here versus the speed of light, which is 670 million miles an hour. Very weak force. But if you can prove and you can find where the number is, then in theory, you have the ability to build a wave generator that phase synchronizes with that wave. Now, once I can phase synchronize with that wave, I can raise its frequency. I can start going up. So the first thing I noticed in the Tether incident was that all these UFOs were strobing with waves. And I was very curious to look at the waves frame by frame to slow it down. So we're going to run the tape again on the Tether incident here, and just notice, I mean, you'll see the black dots spinning here, you'll see this thing strobing, you'll see some of them strobing very fast. We're actually going to go and zoom in on those little guys, on those waves, because they're going to tell us. Because in theory, if I'm right, you have to go from low frequency mass to high frequency to get to light. And if I'm right, we're going to fall onto an experiment done by Canadian scientist John Hutchison, who strobes steel mass with those same waves, low, medium, and high. He makes the steps, and we're going to find out what happens to the cannonball. It's going to solve the riddle in the UFO phenomena. So let's run the tape for a while here. We're going to go through some tape.
See the tether and see the satellite. It's beautiful. This view showing
Is that snow?
the satellite.
I think he was stunned. I really did.
Again, just moving into sunrise. 81 nautical miles now from Columbia.
The reason the tether appears so wide, according to the NASA report, is the satellite at the end of it, nitrogen fuel tank was emptied, and they don't know how. All the nitrogen gas gathered around the electrostatic field around the tether and became ionized. And two theories, and that the sunlight bounced off of the electrostatic field. So it's probably nearly a 3/4 mile wide field that you're seeing around the tether. It's tiny. It's so thin you can barely see it. So what you're seeing is a gas electrostatic field around the tether.
Franklin, we see a long line, a couple of star-like things, and a lot of things swimming in the foreground. Can you describe what you're seeing?
Well, the long line is a tether, and there's a little bit of debris that kind of flies with us, and it's illuminated by the sun at such low angles. So there's a lot of stray light, and it's getting washed out quickly, but Claude is trying to do a quick, good job here adjusting the cameras.
Copy that.
In that description by the crew, this is the tether in the satellite with approximately 12 miles of tether still attached to it. Columbia and the satellite now just passing over the west coast of northern Africa.
Look at the waves.
The
on
two
that
spacecraft now 90 nautical miles apart. Controllers for the satellite did have communications with it during the close pass between Columbia and the satellite.
Columbia, Houston, that's a much better view, a lot more contrast visible. And how wide does that tether appear to be? It seems to resemble a much wider strand than we'd expect. Can you describe which way the satellite is visible on that strand?
Satellite now 100 nautical miles.
Charlie, completely unzoomed, and you see the full extent of the tether. I tried to adjust the focus, but I can't get better than that.
Okay, Claude. Thank you.
I'm going to zoom in now.
By convincing its opponents and making them see the light, but rather because its opponents eventually die and a new generation grows up that is familiar with it. Max Planck, the godfather of quantum physics.
Why was this investigation on NASA UFOs moving into quantum physics? Because without some basic understanding of magnetism, gravity, and life integrated into quantum ideas, the next observations about the UFOs would be impossible to comprehend. We were about to study phenomena that only quantum physics could explain. On the night of January the 10th, 2000, a giant new theory in quantum physics exploded into my mind with crystal clarity. The theory would prove that gravity is gradient in frequencies that eventually, at higher frequencies, would go far beyond light speed, and that those higher frequencies of gravity would conquer the vast diameter of our own galaxy, 100,000 light years, in 1 second and then in 0 time. Eventually, the theory would show how the highest frequencies of gravity could conquer the distance of the entire universe in 0 time. Thus, gravity at this highest frequency would be the only force that is truly beyond space and time. So now we're going to look at phase 2 of the galaxy
This is
clock.
my four-dimensional wave clock, and I'm just kind of giving you a
increase in the
segment
oscillation of
look
waves
at it
as
here.
we-
It's a
as
very
we evolve
complicated
in this
model,
clock.
but
So
if
we
you don't
last
understand
left
what
off
I'm
at the
talking
12
about,
count
just look at
position.
it visually, because
And
when we
already
look at the
broke speed
waves
of
on the
light.
UFOs,
the frequency
it will
of
stun you.
electromagnetism, or gravity, the gravity force, space, and timeline broke the speed of light. I never changed the speed of light on
I'm actually working on breaking the speed of light here, and the way I did it, 2 years later, a physicist named Zhao Maguizhou from one of our major universities, who's been on Larry King Live, broke the speed of light exactly to a T the way I have set forth in here.
represented by this
My
line
copyright is
started to
2
get
years
so
earlier than
powerful
his.
that as we got near the center of the
To a
clock,
T.
and we got to the 12 count position, that force became so powerful and there was so much energy in it that it started to affect mass. And mass, therefore, as it came in contact with these greater charges of energy, started to accelerate. So now we're going to go another 12 counts up to 24 and see what happens. I've already drawn the first line, the 13 line, and we can see what's happening there.
This is looking at
And it
wave-particle
takes us all
relationships
the way
in
to this
all
point.
4
So our wave
dimensions, something that physicists today
growing, and it's
are not
also-
doing
it's
enough
also
of.
curving more.
This is where we find the
So the
answer.
14
Black
seconds.
holes, the Big Bang, time, all of it. I mean, it's so miraculous when you use
Connecting
this
all the
clock.
lines at the
I get
14th
calls from
count
people at Los Alamos
on the
National
galaxy
Labs
clock.
who use it now. I get physicists, even
Time to the
sacred
14th count
geometrists
right here.
are starting to use this model in their
The
work.
15th second. All the way to the 15th position. The 16th second.
Once you reduce the
Each point
spacecraft
on
to
the
zero
galaxy clock,
mass
on
and
each
you can go
wheel,
the speed of light,
at
the
the
next
16
challenge
count
is to break the
position.
speed of light and go far beyond, because even the
starting to
speed of
see
light
what's
is far
happening.
too slow for these
The
craft to
17th
be
count.
operating at. And this is where I'm going into an area that is so dangerous.
Connecting each
You can
point
get
on each
slapped by a
wheel
lot of physicists with this,
at the
but yet,
17 count position.
again, as I pointed out, Zhao Maguizhou finally did it, and so did Raymond Chow at Berkeley.
The
And
18th count.
both of their models fit perfectly into what I'm doing here. So for those who have that kind of a mind, if you don't understand this right now, you can always come up to me in the next 2 days at my table, and I'll hash this out with you and on paper and give you some finer details.
And the 19th count.
But for now, visually to understand what I'm doing, when we look at the waves, we're used to looking at waves on their side in 2D. And you're going to look at the waves on the UFO. They're going to tell us the signature of their propulsion system. It's all about waves and transformation. Transformation of the wave state of mass. That's what it's all about. That's how they do it.
What starts to happen here is the oscillations here are increasing so much. Again, as we look at this galaxy clock, we are seeing the creation of our own galaxy. We can look now for a moment at what the core and what a galaxy actually looks like. and we can see the same phenomena happening. The same creation is actually happening. So what's actually happening is if we take this spiral into an eternally smaller and smaller and smaller orbit, what starts to happen is the oscillations per second of the wave increase so dramatically as we get into smaller and smaller micro-orbits that basically go into the millions, the billions, and the trillions, and all the way to a Google.
Big number.
A number that is so high that as the oscillations get smaller and smaller and smaller, there's actually no end to how small we can go, because we can go into the micro-universe. And as we go into the micro-universe, the oscillations of the wave become so high that the frequency of gravity, the energy in the vortex, the gravity for space and time line is showing us that as it's curving and as it's oscillating faster and faster and faster, that mass, as it comes in contact with this force, starts to accelerate. Photons go from a lower frequency wave state into a higher frequency wave state. For example, in the radio spectrum, as we looked at the electromagnetic spectrum earlier, the lowest part of the EM spectrum that we know, waves are oscillating at around 1,000 times per second.
That's low
By the time you get into visible or even radio frequency,
high
you're
radio.
at 1 million times per second. A wave is oscillating 1 million
Thousands,
times
millions,
per second.
and billions is
That
radio.
means over a distance of 186,282 miles, if we had a wave that long and we coiled it, it would oscillate 1 million times in the frequency of radio. In microwaves, you're oscillating 1 billion times per second.
Microwaves,
and by the time
radar.
you get into infrared, you're at 1 trillion times per second. So when we get into the visible light spectrum, we're operating and oscillating at numbers that are so high in frequency. So what's happening as this frequency increases is, again, the force of gravity becomes so strong that any mass that becomes in contact with that frequency, photons or even solid mass, the frequency of that mass becomes so high that the mass becomes, in essence, lighter. In other words, it doesn't have that sort of feeling of weight to it, the feeling of mass. So it starts to accelerate. So this is starting to tell us what's happening in a black hole in the center of our galaxy.
I am proposing that black holes, everything is reducing in mass.
Mesmerized by the amazing pulsing waves from the STS-75 Tether incident UFOs, I decided to take a look at the waves frame by frame. I felt they might reveal the propulsion system of these giant UFOs. I once asked Dr. Glenn Seaborg, who shared the Nobel Prize with Macmillan for the discovery of plutonium, former chair of the Atomic Energy Commission under Presidents Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon, authorizing all of the nuclear weapons testing at the Nevada test site, about anti-gravity generators being developed by alternative energy developers. He answered me and said, if anyone could build a gravity generator, they would have an energy source far beyond nuclear fusion, and I don't believe anyone is doing anything like that yet.
These pulses
on a huge TV screen with a flawless
are so
S-video
clear and in
VCR,
focus. You'd
and
think
with
if
the
the
help
camera
of
was
Steve
out of
Oakland,
focus,
an amazing
there's no way the
zero-point
waves would be in
scientist,
focus.
we identified and freeze-framed the first pulse of the UFO as it was passing over the top of the 12-mile-long tether. We were both astounded and in such awe I could barely speak.
Any quantum
It was a
physicist who looks
profound
at that
moment in this investigation.
knows exactly what that
We
means.
were looking at what appeared to be a gravity wave with a steep spiral radiating from the UFO right out of the Phase 2 galaxy clock. It was the clear signature of a powerful gravity wave that was clearly bending light into the shape of the incredible magnitude of the wave. The wave radiated right out of the black hole in the center of the UFO, and we could see clearly that by the extreme steepness of the wave coming out of the black hole, that the hole was the point where gravity produced in the UFO's propulsion system was faster than light. And because our eyes and cameras could not produce a signal that fast, it appeared black as the mystery that beckoned me with the knowing that the UFOs were capable of utilizing such high-frequency gravity waves that they could conquer the speed of light and visit us from another star system.
I now believe that's wave number 3, but it really doesn't matter. These waves are...
The Phase 2 pulse was equally astounding because it showed an outward pulsing ring another phenomenon that happened in the galaxy clock when each inner ring completed an oscillation. It produced an outward moving wave, and as all the rings in the galaxy clock completed their oscillations, the wave would radiate out to the periphery of the clock. But this was also telling me that the extreme high-frequency magnetism gravity produced in the center of the UFO's gravity generator was being distributed throughout its mass. There had to be a reason for this, I thought, but was this the UFO's propulsion system? The Phase 3 pulse was showing the ring moving back towards the center, as if to see the galaxy clock moving in the opposite direction. Perhaps they alternated their pulses in time forward with time reverse, and there was some reason for doing this. Perhaps this prevented the high-frequency pulsing energy from dissipating and keeping the mass of the UFO in a high-frequency wave state. I really believe that the answer to our future space program was staring at us with a clear signature from a most profoundly advanced extraterrestrial civilization. But who were they? The answer would take more time. I sent the photographs of the three-phase pulse to Dr. Knuth and wrote the following letter on January 22, 2000. Dear Dr. Knuth, I just wanted to see if you received the photos from the NASA video I sent you. Also, have you seen the videotape yet? What do you think of the pulsing waves of light and their particular formations? Dr. Knuth wrote me back the following letter on February 22, 2000. Dear Mr. Sereda, yes, received your photographs, and they are indeed quite peculiar. However, at least in the photographs, I have seen nothing that could not be explained as floating debris illuminated through sharp shadows in the shuttle bay. Maybe the videotape shows different things. I will try to see the tape soon. Signed, Joe Knuth.
It's hard to explain what you just saw, so I'm going to make it easy for you here. There's three phases that the shuttle cameras could capture on the tape. And you got your black hole in the center. Now remember, this morning, Peter Davenport showed us the eyewitness testimonies of the translucent disk with the dark mass in the center. And also, John Schuessler gave us a report from the People's Republic of China of the notch on the side, the black notch. So it is consistent in a lot of other sightings of UFOs. And so what the waves look like, again, we're used to looking at waves on their side, but when you come in from a wave in the third dimension, depth, waves are actually spinning like this. So when you see the bigger ring, and then you see the small ring, and then you see the spiral, okay, what this tells me is that the wider the diameter on a wave, the lower its frequency. And remember, mass is low in frequency. So if you're going to raise the frequency of mass from its low wave state and raise it up, you have to first phase synchronize with the base level. You can't just send gamma rays or X-rays at a ball of steel. You're just going to get the photoelectric effect, and you're going to heat it up, and you're going to be very frustrated. You have to phase synchronize with the lowest frequency wave, and that means you have to calculate where it is. Once you're in synchronicity with your wave generator, you can start stepping it up. The next wave the camera caught is a smaller ring. That means as the waves spiral in smaller orbits, their frequency is increasing. And then in quantum physics, whenever you see a wave-particle relationship spiral in, that is a quantum leap from a lower frequency wave state to a very high frequency wave state. The black hole in the center is very similar to our black hole in the center of our galaxy, except I propose, and on quantum models do not agree with Einstein and black holes. In quantum models, particle physicists, when you look at the orbits of particles, those with greater mass have much larger diameters. Particles of lower mass in collisions spiral in tighter orbits. The electron is the lowest mass particle we know of. So if you follow that model, greater mass particles have larger orbits, lower mass particles have tighter orbits. What we're seeing is a larger orbit wave, a smaller orbit wave, and then one that just races in. That's a signature going from low, medium to high frequency. So we make spacecrafts out of steel. That's what we do. And if we're going to convert steel to light, and in theory, if I'm right here, what would happen if we bombarded steel with a series of low, medium, and high frequency waves if we stepped it up? Well, just by accident, I found Canadian scientist John Hutchison was doing just that in what is now known as the Hutchison effect. Lockheed Martin and Boeing and all our defense contractors are up there in his lab trying to figure out what he's doing. A lot of you may have heard of him. So what the next piece of footage you're about to see, remember that he's doing the same thing, the very signature. This is evidence. This is what I mean by evidence. This is scientific evidence. You're going to see the answer, the beginning phase of the answer to their propulsion system. So if we could run the tape, we don't have that much more time left here.
The discoverer of what is now known as the Hutchison effect. I met with him in the year 2001 to learn about his work and to show him the galaxy clock and gravity beyond light speed theory. His work demonstrated the principle perfectly. He was the first scientist to change the frequency of mass from a low 7 to 8 hertz wave state to a higher frequency. He did this in an amazing experiment where he bombarded a 75-pound cannonball with high-frequency waves produced by Tesla coils, radio waves, and Van de Graaff waves. As the 75-pound ball absorbed the high-frequency magnetic waves, its mass became lighter, and so light that it actually started to levitate. If we can change the frequency of mass into a high-frequency wave state, it can eventually turn into a form so light that the energy required for propulsion for a spacecraft would reduce or become more efficient and allow us to experience less and less inertia, therefore experience less g-force in spaceflight. If mass could become so light that it became as light as a photon, mass or spacecraft could attain the speed of light with very little energy in the form of actual propulsion. If mass or spacecraft could transform into such a high-frequency wave state that it went far beyond the frequency of waves in the visible light spectrum, mass or spacecraft could become invisible. Higher yet, mass or spacecraft could break the speed of light. Now it was very clear to me how the UFOs were traveling beyond light speed. They were pulsing their spacecraft with such high-frequency waves of energy that the spacecraft reduced its mass to the point that it became so light, lighter than a photon, and when mass becomes that light, it takes so little energy for it to move at the speed of light and beyond. The answer to how we could propel ourselves to the stars was being transmitted to us in the form of a gravity beyond light speed energy wave, the very signature to how a spacecraft could break the speed of light and visit us from outside our own solar system and possibly from one of our nearest stars.
Let's see. I want you to see this before.
The ancient megalithic ruin Stonehenge, believed to be constructed by the ancient Druids in approximately 2900 BC, embraces the midsummer sunrise and beckons the stars above on Salisbury Plain, near Wiltshire in southern England. Many astronomers believed it was an ancient clock to the sun, moon, and the stars with precise alignment patterns that continue to mystify scientists today. Was our ancient past about to reveal a mystery so great that it would wait until we realized that our very own future was inside of our past? Across from Stonehenge in a farmer's field in 1996, the same year as the NASA STS-75 Tether incident, a crop circle appeared with the identical message of the gravity wave pulsating from the UFO. It was a crop circle with the nearly exact same degree of a spiraling wave curvature, even with a hole in the center, just as the NASA STS-75 pulsing UFO revealed. Were intelligent beings trying to send us a message so clear and with such regularity that it was intended for us to decode? Was the message the secret to their propulsion systems and a gravity generator energy source capable of solving our environmental energy pollution crisis?
Okay, stop the tape there. We're not going to be able to finish this whole thing, so we're going to end here. I'm just going to finish with Mexico, if we can bring the lights up. On my comments on Mexico, and I've made these points on the Art Bell Show. How did 11 UFOs show up on forward-looking infrared cameras, which are developed by the United States military? 3 of them showed up on radar. The remaining 8 did not. No one could see them. What is the answer? Well, after what you've just seen, I mean, a lot of you can probably already come up with a conclusion. But why did 3 show up on radar and the remaining 8 did not? According to Jaime Maussan's data, the planes were flying between 11 and 12,000 feet. At that altitude, it's winter down there below the equator. You're at, no, actually, you're above the equator. It's, according to the report, minus 26, 27 degrees. It's very cold. Humidity is 75%. If your UFO's mass is actually vibrating up in the ultraviolet spectrum, say, not even up in the gamma, ultraviolet light is very hot, has temperature. Remember Bud Hopkins' stories about the radiation from these craft and the Betty Cash incident. Ultraviolet radiation is very intense. It's very hot. Now imagine if the whole craft's mass is vibrating in the ultraviolet in Mexico. You won't see it. But what happens is that temperature imprints on that humidity, that moisture. And that moisture heats up instantly. Okay? And then your infrared camera senses the heat signature down in the infrared spectrum, and it gets a picture. But, and that would explain, you know, part of what you're seeing in Mexico. But then we also sent radar, which is microwave radiation at the objects. And 3 of them showed up on radar, and the remaining 8 did not. That fits consistently with my theory, that once mass starts to reduce, it starts to become almost translucent in a way. And mass can disappear even down in the radio spectrum. It doesn't have to disappear instantly up in the ultraviolet. So if it's very low mass but still has some mass, radar would bounce off of it because it has some physicality. But once it starts to go ultra-high frequency, microwaves at the ultraviolet level or X-rays or higher are not going to bounce back. They're going to go right through it. So they're actually demonstrating to us there are different phases of mass. You have some that are near zero mass, which are totally transparent to radar, and you have some that are actually in a low mass state but are actually invisible, and radar actually bounces off of them. The reason the infrared cameras get a very clear picture is because of the temperature conversion going from the ultraviolet imprinting the moisture in the atmosphere, and against that very cold, you know, minus 26 degree background, you get an infrared beacon. So the UFOs are not actually in the infrared. They're much, much higher. You're just seeing, it's like a thumbprint on a piece of, if your hand was really cold and you put your finger on a piece of very hot, steamy glass, you would leave a print. That's all we're seeing in the infrared. That is what I believe is happening in Mexico. And I think the sighting is so significant because it proves what I set forward many years ago when this film came out. It proves that mass can actually start to transform into higher states of frequency and disappear. And John Hutchison with the steel cannonball has gotten steel to actually disappear in front of his eyes. And many of our defense contractors are there studying the phenomena. And since a lot of this work has come out, Lockheed Martin is already using wave generators on aircraft to reduce inertial mass increases. As aircraft go faster, their mass increases. And they're already doing this successfully. They're already strobing steel with waves and getting inertial mass increases to get lower. And by doing that, they save a lot of money on fuel. If they eventually get to the point of zero mass, we'll be doing the speed of light and beyond. Thank you very much.